Welcome back. We are in module 8 now. So, today we will start with lecture 2 of module 8. In this lecture, we will cover childhood bilingualism. Now, childhood bilingualism, there are two types. So, we will start with the simultaneous bilingualism and then follow it up with successive bilingualism. So, when we discuss second language acquisition among children, another important factor needs to be studied, which is the fact that there are two kinds of language acquisition with respect to SLA if we are looking at childhood. So, this is the scenario where we have children who learn the second language alongside the first. So, there are two types. Children, when they can learn their second language as a second language after the first language is in place, but that has to happen a little later in life. But if they learn two languages in the very beginning, from the very early stages, then we have a completely different scenario. So, that is what we will be looking at now. So, children may sometimes learn more than one language at a time in her early life. This brings us to the two kinds of bilingual children that we are now looking at. So, childhood bilingualism can be divided into two types: simultaneous and successive. Simultaneous bilingualism refers to a situation where the child starts learning both the languages almost at the same time. That is why we are calling it simultaneous. They might be exactly at the same time, they might be slightly following one after another, but roughly we can still call them simultaneous. So, that is when we are talking about simultaneous bilingualism. Successive is when the second language is learnt after the first. So, that as the name suggests, one after another. So, these two types are different on many variables. Technically speaking, when we are talking about SLA, second language acquisition among children, the first one will not be actually a second language learning. But since it is another type and a rather important type, so we will put them under bilingualism only. But we will see more detail as to how they are. So, these are some of the primary differences with respect to simultaneous and successive bilingualism. Simultaneous, the two languages are learned together. Successive, as the name suggests, one after another. Onset of language learning is early, that is whatever we are calling second language, in this case the other language, which is the the first language. It has a name which we will see. So, the language onset is very early, but in case of successive, the onset of second language is a little late, that is why it is successive. And thirdly, almost always the two languages are learnt in natural settings, like in home, at home, or in peer group and so on. But in successive second language learning, it will be more often than not always, but more often in the tutored environment, by which we mean that it is formally learned in the school, or if it is a child in the school, if it is an adult in the later part of life, or so in most of the cases it is tutored. Of course, there are social bilingualism as well, which we will discuss separately, but when we are talking about children, this is how the differences are looked at. Now, one important factor, or let us say the defining factor in this in deciding between which is simultaneous and which is successive, is of course the age factor. So, this is there is a cutoff age, so to say, from beyond which they will be called, children will be called successive bilingual, and before which they are simultaneous bilingual. So, what is that cutoff age? It is typically 3 years of age. So, after 3 years, if the child is learning another language after the age of 3, then we will call that child a successive bilingual, but if the other language has been learned before that, it is called simultaneous bilingual. Now, many researchers have found proof of this or provided support as well from various perspectives, primarily from two important perspectives. One is the learning strategy and the other is the neurological perspective. Neurological perspective in terms of the brain development. We have seen before as well, when we discussed about critical period hypothesis, that the brain development happens through stages. and depending on what stage the language comes in, it will have different kinds of impact. So, taking that same kind of logic into consideration, the age 3 cutoff has been mentioned. So, after age 3, any new language is represented differently in the brain. That is that has already been studied. So, before 3 years of age, the languages are represented in a particular area. After 3, there are some differences that have been found. However, what has happened is, in the beginning, of course, the cutoff used to be considered quite strictly. It was like, there is a very airtight sort of a compartment, 3 years, before 3 years and after 3 years kind of a thing. But later studies pointed out that it is better to consider them as a continuum rather than a very strict sort of a differentiation. So, now as of now, the findings are, the standpoint is that it is better to consider them as a continuum, but around 3 years is the agreed upon domain, but it might change depending on various other factors. So, in order to clear the confusion surrounding the simultaneous, when simultaneous turns into successive, and how do you have a different nomenclature, how do you differentiate them and all that. So, there was a different name given to simultaneous bilingualism, which is the bilingual first language acquisition, because when even if you are learning 2 languages, but because both are learned actually de facto as first languages, because all the other variables are exactly as the first language, but it is just in place of one you have 2 languages. Hence, it is not a good idea to call them successive or a second language, but both are first language. Hence, the name bilingual first language acquisition, BFLA. This name was given by Annick de Hauer. So, she defined it as the development of language in young children who hear 2 languages spoken to them from birth. So, from the very beginning, if they have heard 2 languages being spoken to them, then they will be considered part of the BFLA category. Now, this was later considered to be a rather strict definition, but on the whole, this is a good definition, because it takes care of the starting age of the 2 language acquisition, that there is no confusion that they must be exposed to, their children must be spoken to in 2 languages from the very beginning. So, that is where it starts. Now, there is one problem that later researchers have pointed out, which is that there is something called a passive bilingual. Right, because she said the 2 languages should be spoken to them. Now, what happens if you hear 2 languages, but do not produce 2 languages? So, this is where you are a passive bilingual, you hear 2, but you do not use 2. So, in that, to take care of that, there was a solution provided, because from a research perspective, passive bilinguals are difficult to assess. All the discussion that we have had so far, we have seen that we are talking about the elicited data or spontaneous data from the children when they speak or when they comprehend. So, speaking is an important aspect of your language competence and language, even if you go by the competence and performance division, or otherwise also from a psycholinguistic perspective also, it is important for the researchers to get the data, like how you speak, that will give us an idea about what you know. So, if you do not speak, it is very difficult to assess the bilingual competence. Hence, we need to look at that as well. So, in order to understand the finer aspects of simultaneous bilingualism, then it is important to study only those children who speak in both of our language. So, there was an updating on the definition. Grosjean and Lee provided suggested a combination of Howard definition with Grosjean's definition of bilingualism, which was the regular use of 2 or more languages. So, that is how Grosjean had defined So, they have suggested that let us put these two definitions together, Howard's and Grosjean's definition, and then that gave us the concurrent acquisition of two languages in a child who is exposed to them from birth and uses both regularly in early childhood. That is the definition, working definition we will go by when we talk about simultaneous bilingualism. So, this is our definition, updated definition of BFLA. So, when we have simultaneous bilingualism, no one language is first language and no one is of course second language. Hence, one cannot use L1 and L2 sort of notation. What researchers typically do is they refer to both as language A, one with capital A and one with small a, instead of language A and B. There are various other kinds of notations are also there, but this is very common. Now, this is fine. So, we have decided who are simultaneous bilinguals. Now, what happens? Why is it interesting? What happens if a child is growing up as a simultaneous bilingual? Some very interesting things actually happen. So, what they have found out is that children simultaneously learning two languages at an early age often cannot distinguish between their two languages. So, when we discuss this segment, we will go chronologically, starting with the earliest finding to the later findings. So, in the initial findings, initial studies, they reported that children who are growing up as simultaneous bilinguals, they are not able to distinguish between their cannot distinguish between their two languages, because it seems like they mix up a lot of components from one language to another, and which is why we think that they are probably not able to know which is which. So, almost all studies on infant bilingual language acquisition have found that children tend to mix at all levels, phonological, lexical, phrasal, etc. So, as a result of which some researchers, not all, some researchers have argued that children at that in this kind of a scenario have what is called an unitary language system. So, initially the system is only one. Even if they are getting input from two different languages, in their mind it is one system. So, on the basis of this, they propose the 3-stage model, which goes back all the way to 1978, Volterra and Texner's proposal on the model, which was quite popular, and later on of course, it was refuted, but it was very popular at that time. The idea was, the entire thesis was based on a longitudinal study of two German-Italian simultaneous bilingual girls. This study was based in Italy. What they say is that there are 3 stages, stage 1, stage 2 and stage 3 in the developmental stages of a bilingual who is a simultaneous bilingual. In stage 1, what happens? They have one system, so one lexicon and one syntactic system. All the input that they are getting from different languages, whether it is at a lexical level or a syntactic level, they all are part of one system. They have one lexicon and one syntactic system. Gradually, they go to stage 2 when they have 2 lexicon and one syntactic system, and that gives rise to finally stage 3, where they have finally separated the two parts, and now they know that there is system 1 and there is system 2. That is what they proposed. This representation of course is from later studies, but this is the idea. So, 3 stages. So, these are the 3 stages. So, child in the first stage, the child has one lexical system which includes words from both languages and one syntactic structure, kind of a fused system of the 2 languages. The second stage, the child distinguishes 2 different lexicons, but applies the same syntactic rules to both the languages. And then in the third stage, which is about 2.9 to 3 years, which is the final stage, and that is when child has 2 linguistic codes differentiated both in lexicon and in syntax. But each language is exclusively associated with the person using that language, that still remains. So, if the mother speaks Italian, so she will speak in Italian to the mother, German with the father, and like that. But this is how the idea was. So, these stages I have unpacked them a little bit, but this is you get the idea. So, these are some examples, let us see. So, these are the same examples from the same study. In the this child's name is Lisa. So, she lives in Rome, and so there are these two words la and da. La in Italian and da in German both mean there, as opposed to here and there distinction. Dialectic. So, this is in German and Italian, these are the two words for the same concept, and then this child is exposed to both the words. What would she do? What she did was something quite interesting. She divided, because there are two words and because she is not probably understanding it as two different labels for the same concept. So, she made a finer distinction between these two. So, she started using la for visible things and da for invisible things. And this is how they show it, that in from this conversation of Lisa with her mother. So, she is talking about a cat which is outside. So, when the cat is outside, that she is using one term, and when the cat is inside, she is using another term. So, this is how she is differentiating them in terms of their conceptual overlap. So, children do not consider two corresponding words in two languages as corresponding. So, that is the baseline of the of this use. Similarly, she uses da and daki in interesting ways. Da is derived from dare, which is to give, and then daki from danke, which is thank you in German. And then, so she does her own thing. She uses these words in her own way. Because they are some kind of similar, and so she does her own, she has her own concept embedded into them. So, she learned to use da around 1 year 10 months and used it only to give something to somebody. The offering to sweet, when she is offering a sweet to her mother, she says da. So, at this stage child speech has only one lexical form, which is why the differences she makes sure that she has different concepts associated with them. Some researchers have called this form a language system of his or her own at that stage. Let us move on to stage 2. This is when they are able to distinguish words from different languages, but applies the same syntactic rule to both. So, the child now has corresponding words in both the languages, in the sense that same object can be indicated by two different words. That bit has been taken care of pertaining to two different languages. Significantly, words drawn from two lexicons do not occur together in a construction. However, how they arrive at this stage depends on some factors that may influence this choice, which is of course language specific and person specific, child specific, but this is how it apparently happens. So, in case of Lisa again, because she was the subject of the study, she learned two words for specs, for glasses in German and in Italian. So, she learned the word occhiali in glasses in early as her father wears them. So, one day when her mother draws a woman wearing glasses, teaches her the word Brillen. Glasses, her mother is German speaker. So, the word for glasses in German is Brillen, and she teaches her that word, and then she tells her to go and show the drawing to her father and tell him what it shows. Then this is how the conversation goes. The father is asking, what is this? She says Brillen, and then she points to the father's glasses and says occhiali. So, what is this entire story basically telling us is that she learned the glasses that her father wears is called occhiali, the glasses that the drawing had is called Brillen. So, she will use them only exclusively in that domain. She will never use Brillen for her father's glasses. This took a lot of time for her to understand, and even after her mother corrected her, she took a really long time to separate that out. Similarly, stage 3, this is now child now speaks two languages differentiated at both lexical and syntactic level. However, each language is associated with the person using that language. So, one person, one language. So, Italian only with father, German only with the mother, that is how she went. So, this is again it is from the same girl's data. So, when she is talking to her father, she uses proper German sentence. This is Lisa Small, like she uses this kind of a structure. At the end of this stage, when the tendency to categorize people in terms of their language decreases, that is when we consider them truly a bilingual, because till now they were according to the older studies, older research, older theories, scholars, they were kind of confused between these two. And then many other studies have also ratified this kind of finding, that children do mix a lot in the initial stages of their bilingual acquisition, and typically the findings, apart from based on a study which is on various different studies, which is a meta study, meta analysis, a summary of various studies looked at the percentage of mixing, and they found this, that in stage 1 it is 20 to 30%, pretty high, stage 2 slightly less, and stage 3 is 6 to 12%. So, this is what later findings were had pointed out. Now, though mixing has been reported by many studies, the problem that later on arose is that of the explanation as to why there is mixing. Mixing is there, fine, and the initial explanation was of course the unitary language system, which has this 3-stage model, but later explanation did not really entirely agree with the unitary model, and there were many other reasons that were put forward, many other explanations that were put forward. I have listed some of them here. So, unitary language system of course is one of the oldest one, and then there are many others, like mixing is possible even in adult speech. It is quite possible that adults who are bilinguals themselves, or who are in a bilingual environment, they might themselves mix. So, it is not that the child is doing it on her own, she might simply be inspired. Similarly, parents' linguistic practice, context of use, incomplete reporting is another serious concern that has been put forward by many later researchers, that only those those utterances which fit the theory were reported and not the other ones, and so on. Better options in one language, and many other explanations have been put forward. Similarly, bilingual, when parents themselves are bilingual, they might be also using a mixed language. And we also have non-native parents, where one parent addresses the child in a second language despite an otherwise monolingual setting. So, it is a very nuanced kind of a domain. It is it cannot be one size fits all, because every child is different, and every home environment and other kind of environment are different. So, languages are also different. So, it is possible that in some languages some words are more salient. For example, one particular in case of Estonian, for example, one interesting study by women looked at the structural factors. For example, some words are more salient. So, there can be multiple reasons for children to mix in the initial stages. It need not be only one the theory. So, the counter to the 3-stage formula came from various studies. For example, reason for mixing is not due to lack of equivalent words, as Genesi pointed out. Similarly, another study showed that children differ in terms of mixing. So, not every child mixes languages in the same degree or in the same way. There are qualitative and quantitative difference across children and languages as well. So, that is another. So, it is not similar kind of pattern everywhere. Then there was later on many other studies, experimental studies also showed that children may not really have a fused syntactic system. For example, a rather well known study involves studying syntactically contrasting grammatical systems in German and French bilinguals, and what they found was that these two languages have contrasting syntactic features, and you would expect the child to mix, but what they found was from the very beginning the children acquired these systems differently. There was no mixing up. Other works also have pointed out similar kind of observations. This particular study by Muller et al., the study who looked at learning of verb second property among German Italian bilingual child Carlotta. She could use this language specific structure from early on. So, this is so there are many studies which have found counter examples. Then there was this language specific subject realization in German and Italian bilingual child. In German, subject has to be lexically realized. In Italian, it need not be. So, for example, in Hindi also the subject need not be lexically realized. So, khaungi means that it is the first person singular which is the subject. But only the verb tells you that what the subject is. So, the subject can be dropped, it can be null, it need not be overtly lexically marked, but German has a lexically realized subject. Even in that kind of a contrast, the child clearly could differentiate between the two systems. So, findings from various studies, later studies found that they pointed towards that probably there is no fused system lexically or syntactically in the initial stages of bilingual development. And then there are different kinds of hypotheses, since there are two languages that is getting developed at the same time. What could be the possibilities of mutual give and take? Is there a connection between the two languages? Since we know that they are able to keep them separate, so there are chances of sometimes mixing, sometimes not mixing. So, what are the possible theories? So, there are two theories: separate development hypothesis and interdependent development hypothesis. Separate development hypothesis, as the name suggests, this hypothesis says that each language develops separately. As we have already seen with so many examples, that even when there are contrasting grammatical structures, syntactic structures, the children are able to keep them separate. So, this is the same thing that the hypothesis talks about, that two languages develop separately. There is no reason for them to be interdependent. On the other hand, interdependent hypothesis says that, which is proposed by Paradis and Genesi, that two languages develop in an interdependent way. So, that thus leading to mixing. So, this is the hypothesis that tries to explain the existence of mixing, because mixing is also reported, right. So, the studies, the funny thing about this kind of experimental studies is that you get support for both sides of the argument. You do get some cases of mixing, you also get cases where children are able to keep contrasting features separate, contrasting language completely separate. So, we have proof for interdependent kind of hypothesis as well. So, there are all these studies that I have added, they are these have all looked at these two hypotheses. Another important concept within this entire debate is that of cross linguistic influence. As the name suggests, it is the influence from L1 to L2. So, if we are talking about separate development hypothesis, it does not allow any cross linguistic influence, because they are kept separate completely, and interdependent by virtue of being interdependent automatically makes way for CLI to happen. So, how does one again explain the contradicting evidence? So, there are many possible explanations that have been put forward. One is the case of language dominance. So, even if two languages are separate, they are kept separate, there might be other factors that might result in the CLI to be observed. So, the dominance factor is, for example, one study that looked at Cantonese English bilinguals. So, they showed that the Cantonese was a dominant language over English, and hence showed a lot of influence of Cantonese on English of the children. Then there are other possibilities, for example, the interpretation of data. Often what happens, the same data that has been interpreted in one way, another person can interpret the same data in a different way. That is possible in experimental studies, which has happened in this case as well. So, an important study finds proof of both SDH and CLI between Japanese and English languages, but the same data was interpreted as SDH only by D. Howard. So, this is what we mean. It depends on how you look at the data and what kind of tests do you run. And then of course, the another possibility of some domains are more vulnerable for CLI, whereas others are not, domains as in grammatical domains. So, that is why it is possible to have CLI even if you are talking about separate development hypothesis. Now, what does it, this idea of domains, some domains being more susceptible for influence, takes us to a very interesting domain again, that idea of language being made up of subsystems. So, language is not one monolithic whole, it has various sub domains within it. So, the language should not be seen as a single system, that is what has been now proposed, that it is made up of subsystems. So, even when languages are developing separately, on the whole they are separate, but there might be at a subsystem level there might be some amount of give and take between the L1 and between the two first languages. So, in fact, simultaneous bilingualism allows separation of some grammatical aspects while keeping other domains open for cross linguistic interference or influence. And then of course, you have other problems of bilingualism which are similar to the monolingual or let us say L1 acquisition, which is the problem of the data, how much input that you get. So, the given the sparse input, the poverty of stimulus logic. So, given the even if it is not enough for even L1, how does it become enough for two languages for the simultaneous bilingual. So, this has been this has been called the twice as complex problem. So, poverty of stimulus is twice complex here. Similarly, the quantity and quality of input of both the languages may not be equal. They may not be equal in terms of quality, may not be equal in terms of quantity, that has also been looked at. Similarly, balanced and unbalanced development. So, all of these are part of the same poverty of stimulus idea, but it is only a double poverty of stimulus in case of simultaneous bilinguals. So, in an ideal scenario, you will have both the languages will have similar kind of similar quality and similar quantity and similar amount of both the language input, but that does not happen all the way like that. That is an ideal scenario. In a realistic scenario, often there will be no balance between the two languages input. Now, this might result in unbalanced development in the two languages. So, we have already seen that dominance has been put forward as one of the reasons. So, one language might be dominant. In the environment, let us say there are these both the parents, one of them speaks Cantonese, the other person speaks English, and Cantonese is spoken more, or it is the more dominant language, it is present more in the environment, that might lead to the unbalanced outcome. So, this is also a possibility. So, the language faculty is often thought to be fully capable of handling the challenges of input, as it happens in case of monolingual acquisition as in L1 acquisition, but in case of bilingualism it is a possibility, and it does happen that some people are balanced bilingual, some people are unbalanced bilingual. So, even when you are a childhood bilingual as in simultaneous bilingual, it is theoretically it is possible for some of them to be unbalanced as well. So, there is also input effect, that input plays a larger role than in case of monolingual children, and that is why it is important to estimate the same. So, for example, Singapore English may show a lot of Chinese influence. Now, how do you evaluate that? Why is Chinese influence more? Is it because of the way Singapore English is spoken, or is it due to the unbalanced input? So, there are all these nuances even within simultaneous bilingualism with respect to children. So, we can sum up this segment by saying that childhood acquisition of two languages simultaneously is an important domain within language acquisition, and this throws light on the developmental trajectory often pointing out to sometimes there are changes, there are differences of course, but because both are being learnt at the same time, and if you follow the universal grammar, they are both getting acquired at the same time when the access to UG is complete. So, hence we should see similar kind of pattern in development in both the languages, which is true in some cases because children are able to keep them separate, but at some times we do see some differences. So, that is all these different kinds of outcomes make this an interesting domain. But due to paucity of time, we cannot really break it down further. We will stop this segment here, and in the next lecture, we will look up the successive bilingual in case of children. So, childhood bilingualism, childhood SLA we will take up in the next lecture. Thank you.